OLC4O. This is Term 1A. We are on Class 12 and we're beginning Unit 2. We're going to be talking about Lesson 6 and we're doing the readings and the practice today, and then we get to the key question tomorrow. Today is September 22nd, 2025. This is week 4 of the course and I am Jillian Percy. Here are all the ways to contact me. The studio number is 1-800-465-7144. Keep in mind that if you call that number and are talking to me, I am on the radio, so will you, okay? Office number 1-800-667-3703, extension 2211. And again, just a warning that after 4:30, there is no one there answering the phones. Like, I'm still in the building, but it has to go through switchboard first, and no one's there. I just make people get confused about that. Email. There are 2 emails you can use for me, jillian.percy@nnec.on.ca or jillian.percy@nnecschools.org. My Facebook is capital G, capital P, ERCY, space, capital W, AHSA. If you put in a friend request there, please also send me a message so that I know what course you're in. Because occasionally I get kind of random people sending me messages that aren't students, and I don't generally, that's only my teacher account, okay? There are 2 different YouTube channels. One is my teacher one, which is also G. Percy Wassa. And then there's the school YouTube channel, which is Wassa Distance Education Center. And so all the classes are performed live, and then we record them, and the saved copies are put on the YouTube channel so you can watch them later on at your convenience, because I know a lot of our students are working. Okay, whenever you hand in work, please send it to studentwork@nnec.on.ca. That way the secretary can log that you submitted the work. You're welcome to include me in the email as well so I know to look out for it. But it really should go there, because if there's ever any kind of teacher change or you want to carry it over to the next year, it's so much easier to do. Please make sure your full name, the course name, the assignment number, and the name are physically right on your assignment, not just in the email, because I don't see the email usually. Someone else prints it off and puts it in my mailbox. If there is a good copy and a rough copy of something, please label which one is which. If it doesn't ask for a rough copy, you do not need to hand one in to me, okay? Now, there are multiple ways to hand in assignments. If there is a DEC in your learning center, you can ask them to scan it and send it to me. Hang on to your originals because you will need them for a portfolio project later on. You can fax it to me at 1-800-463-7852. If you're doing that, let me know, because it's usually on sleep mode, and I'll kind of click it on so that I know we get stuff. You can scan it yourself using a scanner app on your phone and then send it to me, and I'll show you a little bit more than that one in a minute. Now, you can mail it to me, but I really strongly discourage people from doing that, because there's always issues with postal strikes, or things get lost, or it takes much longer than people expected and then they're frustrated. So that would be your very last resort, okay? If you do your work on a computer, you are welcome to share documents with me through Google Docs. Some people do it in Word and then they email it to me. That's fine too. A lot of people, if they're handwriting their assignments, will take a photograph of them and then they'll send it to me in Facebook. Give me a heads up that you're going to be doing that. Like, make sure you've reached out to me, friend request me, sent me something, because I would hate to not notice it because you didn't friend me first, right? That would be frustrating for everybody. If you're taking photographs that way, make sure it's clear and not blurry. Preferably then do your assignments in pen so it's dark enough for me to read. A lot of times pencil comes up very fuzzy and it's really hard to read on the phone. The other thing is, generally once you've taken a picture, you'll have 2 options, email or email as an attachment. Please always pick email as an attachment. When you just email it to me, the quality isn't very good and it's hard to pull it out and turn it into an assignment, okay? This way is much easier. Okay, so I use Adobe Scan. You can use whatever scan device you want. You download it onto the phone, then you open it up just like you're going to take a picture. It's just that the quality is way better than the photographs you can take on your phone without it, okay? You line up the dots for the corners, or you can line up the border, you snap the picture, and you keep on doing that over and over until you've got all the pages done for your assignment. Then hit continue. Then you can preview what you've done so far. If you need to retake a shot, it will let you. If you want to put things in a different order, you can. Or if you want to crop something out that you didn't want to include, that's fine. Then hit Save PDF, give your document a name, and save it to wherever you save your stuff. Google Drive, Dropbox, OneDrive, wherever it is, and then send me an email and attach that as a document. If you're planning to do photographs of most of your assignments, this is probably the most reliable way to do it, especially if you're planning to send me 20 assignments at once. Pulling them out of the email takes a really long time. So please try and help us out that way. Okay, Unit 2, Lesson 6, we're working with informational texts. This is the success criteria for Lesson 6. By the end of this lesson, you will have achieved the lesson goals if you can explain the purpose and use of informational texts, identify and use nonfiction text features to help you understand a text, understand and identify different points of view in a text, use a dictionary and a glossary in order to learn the meanings of new words, identify and write complex sentences correctly. Okay, so we're going to start with complex sentences. If you remember, in Lesson 5, we were talking about compound sentences. So compound is when you have two independent sentences or clauses, and they are joined together with a coordinating conjunction. A complex sentence is when you have one independent clause, and it's joined to a dependent clause. So remember that an independent clause has a subject, a verb, and it can stand on its own or independently. In other words, it makes sense all by itself. So if I said, he went swimming, that counts as an independent clause. A dependent clause is an incomplete sentence. It does not express a complete thought, even though it includes a subject and a verb. So if I said, provided that you have enough money, that's kind of one half of a sentence. That is a dependent clause. It needs the other half. It doesn't make sense without the other half of the sentence. Sometimes we call a dependent clause a subordinate clause. And that's because we always start a dependent clause with what we call a subordinate conjunction that joins it to the independent clause. There are a whole lot of subordinate conjunctions, and just like with coordinating conjunctions, they suggest different types of relationships between the two sentences. Okay. Subordinate relationships. Sometimes people think it's like, I don't understand what you mean when you're talking about a relationship, because they always think of relationship as meaning like a synonym for being a couple. But that is not the word's only meaning. It also just means showing that things are connected in some way. So subordinate conjunctions can show relationships of place, comparison, concession, condition, time, purpose, or cause and effect. So basically it's showing you this sentence is connected to this sentence, and the subordinating conjunction is showing you what? Is it connected by place? Is somebody making a comparison? Are they demanding a condition? Are they showing you there's a time relationship? All those kind of ideas, okay? This is a chart of some subordinate conjunctions. There are a lot. This is just a sampling, okay? So if you're trying to make a comparison, you might say something like rather than, as much as, whereas, or than. Time, there's all sorts of time ones. Before, after, as soon as long as, by the time, now that, since, till, until, when, whenever. Conditions. That's when someone's saying like, well, this can happen, but this other condition has to happen too. So if, only if, unless, provided that, assuming that, even if, in case that, lest, once, or whether. Reasons might be because, since, that, or as. Purpose, things like so that, in order that, or just that by itself. Concession, though, although, even though, except. Sometimes concession will sound a lot like contrast. Place, where or wherever. Manner, how, as though, as if, like. Okay, so subordinate clauses always start with a subordinate conjunction, but the subordinate clause can come before the independent clause or it can come after the independent clause. So the clause has to start with a subordinate conjunction. That's what's making the clause dependent or sound like an unfinished thought. If I say, as soon as I'm back, as soon as is a subordinate conjunction, and it kind of clearly implies that there's another half of the sentence. Sorry, just realized that. Only if Dad says yes, whether you like it or not, before you go to bed, rather than you coming in late. And you can hear it, like all of those have a subject. We've got I'm, Dad, you, or you. They have a verb, am, says, like, go, coming, but they don't make sense on their own. The other half of the sentence is missing, okay? So for style number 1, I could put the independent clause first, and then I've got the subordinate conjunction in the middle and the subordinate clause following. So I am going to the coffee shop, that's my independent clause, because that's my conjunction. I have a date meeting me there. Okay? So that whole thing from because all the way to the end is a subordinate clause. She is doing the laundry. That's my independent clause. While is my subordinate conjunction. While her husband does a garbage run is the subordinate clause. I am picking up Sandra. Independent clause. Whenever, conjunction, she finishes up her shift at work. Okay? So in this style, the subordinate conjunction and its clause follow right after the independent clause. When the independent clause comes first like this, there is no need to put a comma at the end of it because the subordinating conjunction is doing the joining. So that's fine. This is different than with compound sentences where you do put a comma there. Okay, style number 2, sometimes the subordinate conjunction and clause come first, and then the independent clause comes. When this happens, the subordinate conjunction is still at the beginning of the clause, okay? After I finish work, comma, I am going to the gym. So I want to point out for this kind, you do put a comma after the subordinate conjunction, okay? Because it sounds unfinished, it's kind of letting you know, hey, here's the one end of one clause, and now the next part is a new clause. It's just kind of like a little courtesy to the reader so they understand what's happening. Since you got here early, comma, we could leave right away. So since you got here early is a subordinate conjunction or clause, and we could leave right away as your independent clause. Because you love concerts, comma, I got us some tickets to a show on the weekend. So because you love concerts is our subordinate conjunction and clause. And then I got us some tickets to a show on the weekend is my independent clause. Before we go outside, comma, we need to shut the lights off. Before we go outside is the subordinate clause. We need to shut the lights off is the independent clause. Yeah, we talked about the comma already, so we're good there. Okay. So we're just going to do a little practice here. This is support question number 1. We're going back to the beginning of counting because we're on a new unit. So that, because these don't get handed in, that's just fine. Underline the dependent clause in the sentences below. So if you're not sure how to do that, think about where is the subordinating conjunction. And if you've got your paper unit, I would honestly just sit there with the chart. Hang on, let me show you that chart again, right? Because this chart's in your book. I took it right out of your book. I would sit there with the chart, and I would sit there with this, and I would go through and find my subordinating conjunctions. Let me kind of give you a quick idea of what I mean. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to put this kind of over to the side. So see how it says before? So I already know before is beginning one of the dependent clauses. So then if you can see it, before you can go out, comma, well, I can remember that pattern. Remember how the pattern is It starts with a subordinate conjunction. You've got your subject, you've got your verbs, and then it's going to end where your comma is. So that whole section there, I'm just going to, it says underline. Oh, that will it show up? Yeah, it does show up. Okay. And then I'm not going to do anything with the dishes need to be done because that part isn't dependent. Okay. I can't go to the movie unless I get someone to cover my shift at work. So unless is clearly our joining word. And so then I follow all the way through to the end of that section and I would underline it. Unless I get someone to cover my shift at work. That whole chunk is our dependent clause. The boy ordered pizza because it was his favorite. Did you hear the conjunction? Because. So because is the beginning of it, and then I'm just going to go to the end. Now, I want to point out there are some slightly more complex sentences where you might have a few more clauses involved. I don't for these. Okay, I'm doing it more simply for these. In your own writing, it might be a little bit more complex if you're comfortable with that. After work is done, I need to go pick up my car. Okay, so after is the joining word, and I'm going to follow through to the comma because that shows me that that clause is done. And now I don't need to do anything to I need to pick up my car because that's an independent clause. As soon as you get your paycheck, please pay me back the loan. Okay, so as soon as is that is another subordinate conjunction. I'm going to go all the way to my comma. As soon as you get your paycheck, comma, please pay me back the loan. So I'm going to underline as soon as you get your paycheck. I created a will in order to make sure that my kids are treated equally. Now that is tricky because it's not one word. Do you hear it right there in the middle? In order of the two. That's the beginning of it. And you can see it's kind of going until the end. In order to make sure that my kids are treated equally. So I underline that whole section. I wanted you to know that I saw how hard you worked yesterday. Now this one is tricky. Like, where is the conjunction there? Where is the joining word? This is one that sometimes people have a hard time recognizing. And it's because this particular word can do so many different jobs in a sentence, so people don't realize that it switched jobs here. So right now, the word that, instead of acting like a pronoun, it is acting like a conjunction here. And it's connecting the second half of the sentence. That I saw how hard you worked yesterday. Oops, sorry, everything's trying to stick there. Oh, hang on. Sorry. There we go. Okay. So that is one that people don't always recognize as a subordinate conjunction. And again, it isn't always. But in this case, it's joining the first part of the sentence. I want you to know. What do I want you to know? That I saw how hard you worked yesterday. It's joining there. It's not standing. Remember how a pronoun is standing in the place of something, right? If I said, oh, okay, I can't think of anything right now on the fly. I know my brain will freeze up. I apologize. But be cautious with that one. That one's easy to miss, okay? Now, number 2. Look at the sentences below and decide if they have been punctuated correctly. Circle correct or incorrect for each one. So what I am looking for here is the comma in the right place and is it needed? Okay? So if it's not there but you should have put it there, it's incorrect. If it's put there but you didn't need it, it's also incorrect. I'm not really worried about the ends at all. I'm just looking for where that comma should be. I got here early since you said you needed help. Now, is that correct or incorrect? How do I decide? Well, I'm looking to see where is the dependent clause. If the dependent clause is at the end, after the independent clause, I don't need a comma to separate the two. So right here, I got here early. That's my independent clause, and then it's followed with since you said you needed help. That's correct. I don't need a comma there because the subordinating conjunction's right there in the middle doing the joining. So that one is correct. Okay. Because she was upset with him, she left the party early. Okay, so where is the dependent clause here? It's right at the beginning, right? Because she was upset with him. And at that point, there should be a comma there because that's the end of that clause. So this one has been done incorrectly. They should have put a comma there and they did not. After the rain, the sun came out. Is that correct or incorrect? Where is the dependent clause? After the rain. Ooh. Now, this is correct. This is done correctly, but you know what? I'm just looking at this and going, you know what? I'm going to add a little sentence here. After the rain ended, the sun came out. Why did I add that? Because a clause is supposed to have a subject, the rain, and a verb. So it somehow, I think it got dropped off there. It should have had the verb there. So it is correct. It was punctuated correctly no matter what. It just was incorrect as far as being a complex sentence. That's my mistake, not yours. I am happy to meet up with you, period, wherever you want to go. Okay. That one's kind of weird. What's going on with that one? There's two sentences there. But a complex sentence is two smaller sentences joined together. It looks like to me like this person used a period between the two smaller sentences instead of a comma. That period should have been a comma, like I am happy to meet up with you. Oh, actually, don't even need the comma there. Wherever you want to go, because wherever you want to go is your dependent clause, and it's coming second, so there's no comma needed. And no period needed. They just needed to cross all that stuff off and just continue the sentence. So this one is also done incorrectly. Whenever she is ready, comma, Dad will drive her to school. Okay, where's the dependent clause? It's at the beginning. Whenever she is ready, comma, yep, Dad will drive her to school. So that's done correctly. Great. Provided that you have the money, you are welcome to come on the trip. Okay, so provided that is at the beginning, that's my dependent clause. Provided that you have the money, there should be a comma there before the next clause starts. You are welcome to come on the trip. So that one has been done incorrectly. They didn't do the comma where they should have done. Okay. So then we're going to talk about our informational texts here. Informational texts are all around us in everyday life. Newspapers, magazines, textbooks, public service messages, or announcements are all common sources of informational text. The main overall purpose of informational text is to inform people about a topic, event, or person. Informational texts may summarize facts about a subject, describe a place or an event, teach people how to do something, or explain why something happened. These texts are meant to contain facts rather than imaginary stories. Keep in mind that publications such as newspapers and magazines may have a wide variety of different text types inside. Some articles may be informational, but others may be opinions. Newspapers will also include advertising, reviews, letters to the editors, as well as legal notices, job ads, comic strips, and weather reports. When you're flipping through these types of reading sources where there's a lot of different types of writing in one container, essentially, it's important to be aware that not everything you're reading is automatically true or factual, right? So here's a letter to the editor. This is somebody's opinion. It may be true. It may not be true. We don't know. It's an opinion. Here's a comic strip. This isn't meant to inform you about anything. It's just meant to be silly and funny. Here's where someone from the newspaper wrote their opinion on something. Okay? Down here, there's little job ads. I suppose you could technically call them information, but they are also sometimes selling things. So they're also kind of a type of persuasive of information. So be mindful when you're reading magazines or newspapers or things like that, that not necessarily everything you're reading is true. You don't want to get to the habit of thinking that Because it's in a book, I know it's true. That just isn't the case, right? So the audience for different types of informational text may be quite different from one piece of writing to the next. The writer may be writing to a certain gender or age or to a certain economic bracket. Now, I wanted to talk about this because sometimes when we use the word audience in everyday life, we are thinking of like, oh, people went to see the movie and there were a lot of people in the audience. And it's just like whoever happens to be sitting there. But when people are writing, they're sending their writing out into the world. There's no one sitting in a group waiting for that writing to come. So they're not writing for like a specific room. They're thinking, hey, who would want to read this information? And different writers can be writing to different types of people. Some people specialize in writing to children. Some people specialize in writing to teenagers or seniors. Some people specialize in writing to people of a certain gender, right? There are men's magazines, there are female magazines. There are magazines and newspapers that are written to a certain economic bracket. There are all different ways that you can describe your audience, and not every writer is writing to every single type of person. Okay. Sometimes they might be writing for people who live in a certain region or around the world, right? Like there are probably a lot of newspaper articles about Canada politics and Canadian news that somebody in, say, France could care less about. It doesn't affect them. They don't live here, right? An article in a magazine like Teen Vogue might be aimed at 12 to 18-year-olds in North America, whereas an article in Maclean's news magazine might be aimed at all adults in Canada, right? So again, that's kind of the idea of keeping in mind your audience. Some information may be targeted at people with a certain occupation or a special interest or level of knowledge in a particular subject. Flying magazine, for example, is written entirely for people who work in aviation, people like pilots, plane owners, airline owners. There are also magazines devoted to a variety of topics that people might be interested in, things like sewing, crafting, cars, fitness, skateboarding, musical genres, art. There are so many different magazines. Sometimes informational sources may even be written for certain races, things like Black Enterprise magazine or Indigenous SME business magazine, okay? So sometimes that kind of bothers people and they're worried, oh, that's racist. And, you do have that concern, but usually what's happening is they feel like there's certain information that people may need to know that will kind of give them a leg up and kind of even out the playing field sort of idea. Okay, so here's just a few different magazines, and sometimes it will be really obvious from the title who it's aimed at. If you see the topic and it's totally quilting, okay, well, it's aimed towards people who like quilting. This one's called American Patchwork and Quilting, so it may be more aimed at people in America than people, say, in Britain, right? This one, hang on, I'm pretty sure there's a Contemporary Indigenous magazine, it says up top, right? And so that doesn't mean that no one else can read it, but it does mean it's deliberately picking topics that they think other Indigenous people will be interested in, and it probably means most of the people who are writing it are Indigenous as well. Classic cars, okay, obviously that's for people who are interested in classic cars. Rolling Stone is tricky. Like, if you've been around, it's a music magazine. It's a little bit of a, well, there's a very famous music group called that. I'm trying to think if they have a tagline anywhere. Sometimes they have like their main title and then they have like a littler title, but this one doesn't have that. No, okay. So something to be aware of for some types of material, it's really important. Like a magazine that had health information about it that's geared towards other doctors, like doctors writing to other doctors, is going to be written at a completely different level than a health magazine that's written to the average day consumer who just wants to have an idea about how to live a little more healthy, right? That kind of thing too, in terms of occupation. Okay. Also, keep in mind there are digital versions of many magazines if you don't have access to print versions. I must confess, I was super sad when the pharmacy over there on 14th stopped carrying magazines, because now you have to go all the way to Dryden to get magazines, and I miss that. But a lot of magazines are also available on digital version, and sometimes they'll even let you read like a story or two without necessarily having to buy. The other cool thing is you can buy back issues if you want to. So here are just some examples I found. People, fishing essay, I'm not sure what the essay means. Creative beating. Again, I'm going to blow this up for a second and just kind of quickly look. Hang on. Oh, I can't quite read it. Need my glasses. I'm not sure what the essay stands for, if that means a certain part of the country or what that stands for. Okay, so we're going to quickly kind of switch to point of view, which I think we talked about briefly when we were doing fiction, but there is point of view in informational text as well. Okay? Point of view is just the term given to the perspective from which a story is narrated or told. But that is true even in textbooks, okay? There are three general types of narration: first person, second person, and third person. Each type has its own advantages and disadvantages, okay? In first person point of view, the narrator is a character in the story or in the event of some sort, and they are also the person who's telling or experiencing the story. Many readers enjoy this type of point of view. It's often very accessible and easy to read, and it leaves the reader feeling like they're going through the events themselves with the narrator. Nonfiction texts like memoirs, journals, movies and book reviews, autobiographies, travelogues might be written in the first person. So here's a sample from The Hunger Games. When I was younger, I scared my mother to death. The things I would blurt out about District 12, about the people who rule our country, Panim, from the far-off city called the capital. Eventually, I understood this would only lead to more trouble. So I learned to hold my tongue and to turn my features into an indifferent mask so that no one could ever read my thoughts. Okay, I'm going to kind of grab a pen here. So my mother, the people who rule our country, this would only lead us to more trouble. I learned to hold my tongue and turn my features so that no one could read my thoughts. Those are all first person words that is showing you that the narrator is writing from their own personal point of view. Okay? In this case, it's a fictional point of view, but if you were writing like an autobiography, it can be informational too. It doesn't have to, it can be either way. Second person point of view. This one is a little bit trickier. In this type of narration, the narrator tells the story sort of to another character as if they were directly addressing them, using words like you and your. Second person point of view is relatively rare in fiction. It's very common in advertising, like, you want to feel the best you ever can? Use this deodorant, blah, blah, blah. And they're talking as if they're like a friend talking right to you. One example of this type of writing would be things like choose your own adventure stories, which are written as if the reader is the main character, and after each new event, they're given an opportunity to make their own choice as to what they will do next. In nonfiction or informational writing, you might see the second person point of view in procedural writing, how-to writing, including some self-help books or articles. Like, I might say, if you're doing a recipe, you cut up the lemons. You need to make sure to stir quickly or it will burn. And it's talking directly to you as if you're standing right next to the person. This is an example from the book called Bright Lights, Big City. You have traveled in the course of the night from the meticulous to the slime. The girl with the shaved head has a scar tattooed on her scalp. It looks like a long, sutured gash. You tell her it is very realistic. She takes this as a compliment and thanks you. You meant as opposed to romantic. So there are not a lot of narrative stories written in this format because it's a little bit, I find it confusing myself anyways. All right. Third person point of view. In this type of narration, the characters are described as if they're being observed. This is an extremely common type of perspective in many forms of writing, including fiction, news articles, nonfiction writing. All sorts of like textbooks are written in this way. There are two main types of third person point of view: omniscient and limited. Okay, third person omniscient. The omniscient narrator it comes off sounding like an all knowing, godlike kind of character, and they can look at the events and the characters from many different perspectives of space and time. Like they might say something like, little did they know their entire world was about to collapse, right? The person doesn't know that. The narrator, who's kind of standing outside and telling you stuff, is giving you a heads up that that's about to happen. That's an omniscient style. Sometimes they'll jump from one character's thoughts to another character's thoughts. Or they may describe events happening outside of the eyesight or the knowledge of the main characters. They might give foreshadowing or even comment on the events occurring in the novel. This is an example from Dune. And the author he skips in this kind of several paragraphs from the Reverend Mother's thoughts to Jessica's thoughts, she's the mom, and then to Paul's thoughts, Paul's the little boy, okay? So kind of listen, you can see how it jumps from person to person. Jessica stopped 3 paces from the chair, dropped a small curtsy, a gentle flick of the left hand along the line of her skirt. Paul gave the short bow his dancing master had taught, the one used when in doubt of another's station. The nuances of Paul's greeting were not lost on the Reverend Mother. She said, "He's a cautious one, Jessica." So right here, we're in the Reverend Mother's thoughts. She is the one noticing these things happening, and she's noticing how careful Paul is. But now we're switching. Jessica's hand went to Paul's shoulder, tightened there. For a heartbeat, fear pulsed through her palm. Then she had herself under control. "Thus he has been taught, your reverence." So now we're hearing kind of her own thoughts. She's telling us that she's feeling scared and she's feeling like she's trying to get herself under control. This is an omniscient style because we've jumped from one person to the next, right? Only in this idea, the idea is only God could know these, right? What does she fear? Paul wondered. Okay, now we jumped to a third person's thoughts. The old woman studied Paul in one just tall and flicker, face oval like Jessica's, but strong bones, hair the Duke's black but with brow line of the maternal grandfather who cannot be named, and that thin disdainful nose, shape of directly staring green eyes, like the old Duke, the paternal grandfather who's dead. Well, now we've switched back to the Reverend Mother. So some people really don't like the omniscient narrator because they find it confusing because they're jumping from person to person to person. Other people feel like, well, that's not really fair. We should only tell a story from one point of view. I don't think that's reasonable. I think you can tell a story from whatever point of view works for what you're trying to achieve. But if you ever found yourself sort of confused as to who's talking or who's thinking, there's a good bet that that's why it's an omniscient narrator and you've gotten kind of mixed up because the person has jumped again. It takes a lot of skill to do it well. Third person point of view, limited. So here, the narrator's in the third person point of view, but they're limiting themselves to one character's thoughts and impressions and like what they see. It's sometimes felt to be in a more objective point of view, as it doesn't address the reader directly, and it doesn't really share the writer's thoughts or opinions. You only know what the character is thinking. This style is really common in textbooks and in news articles. Here's an example of that. Okay, yeah, we only have access to the main character's thoughts. Everything in the text is seen through that character's eyes, as if we were inside his or her head. Joost had 2 problems, the moon and his mustache. He was supposed to be making his rounds at the Hoed house, but for the last 15 minutes he'd been hovering around the southeast wall of the gardens, trying to think of something clever and romantic to say to Anya. If only Anya's eyes were blue like the sea, or green like an emerald. Instead, her eyes were brown, lovely, dreamy, melted chocolate brown, rabbit fur brown. Just tell her she's got skin like moonlight, his friend Pieter had said. Girls love that. So here, we're getting all the information as he, she, but it's as if someone's kind of like standing right next to this person, or they're talking about themselves in the third person. They're not saying I, and it does give you a little bit more range to talk about. I think the I format, the first person format, is a bit limiting. The one problem with third person limited is it can sound as if it's objective, like as if everything's just facts, but in textbooks, sometimes the person who wrote it may not be objective. They may have had prejudices or biases or things they thought were really important and things they chose to ignore. So sometimes third person limited, you need to be cautious when you're reading it of what could I be missing that I don't realize I'm missing. In first person point of view, it's really obvious. Hey, I know I'm only seeing things from this person's eyes, and so people kind of take it with a grain of salt. With textbooks written in the third person limited, sometimes people forget it's still a person writing this. They can still make mistakes, lie, have prejudices, all those kinds of things. All right? Okay, so this is support question number 2. And just all this kind of thing is just reviewing what we've already talked about. What is the main purpose of informational text? It's literally right in the name, right? Informational text is meant to inform people about something, usually people, places, or some sort of event. Number 2, name at least 5 different characteristics that might affect who the audience is for a piece of text. If you look back, we talked about it. There are more than 5. There's all sorts of things you could list, but some of the obvious ones: age, gender, so age, gender, where they live, like region, occupation can be one, interests can be another. You could also have language, heritage, race, economics, right? There's a lot of different things that can affect who the audience is. What types of publications print informational text? There's all sorts, right? Newspapers do, textbooks do, magazines, doctors' offices and hospitals will put out informational brochures. Banks sometimes can put out informational brochures. A lot of different places can print informational text. What are some of the different point of views that informational text can be written in? So we just talked about that, right? So textbooks are often written in third person limited. Travel logs are often written in first person. Informational text, not a lot of second person, right? There might be a few, but there's not a lot. Okay. So now we're talking about nonfiction text features. Now, some of this stuff you might see in a magazine that had a long story, or a newspaper ad that had a long story, but mostly you're going to see these kinds of text features in textbooks. They're ways, because textbooks are huge, they're massive, they have so many words in them, and it's a lot of information. It's usually new information you're trying to teach people. And so they do all sorts of different things to try to make the text more understandable to students and to make it easier for people to find the information they're looking for, because you don't necessarily want to read the entire textbook from the beginning to the end if you only need the information from one chapter. So a lot of these features only exist in nonfiction textbooks, okay? Sometimes students don't fully understand how these features work, or they just ignore them. And that often leads to students not fully comprehending the text they're reading. Yep, not all informational texts will use these features depending on the length, the content, and the author's preference. So here's a list of common nonfiction text features that are used to help organize, illustrate, explain, or emphasize the information that you are reading. Okay, table of contents. Longer informational text such as books may include a table of contents at the front of the book, which will lay out the sequence of sections, chapters, and sometimes articles, along with page numbers to locate them. So here you can see there's a bunch of stuff that happens before the textbook even starts. Chapter 1 is all about basic scientific principles of physiology. And then there's all sorts of different subsections: introduction, level of organization, characteristics of life. Then even at the end of the chapter, there's a conclusion, there's a glossary, there's references, there's activities that the teacher could choose to do, a little mini test. Find out more. That's probably links to different websites or different books you could read, right? So if you knew, hey, I've got a bunch of stuff I need to learn about acids and bases, I wouldn't necessarily need to read the entire chapter. I could just go to the little section on acids and bases on page 10, right? So that's why a table of contents is really helpful. Index. An index is found at the back of the book, okay? Index is a list of topics, concepts, people, places, along with their pages. This is usually way more specific than the table of contents, and it is organized alphabetically. This can be very useful when you're doing research. For example, a history textbook often has chapters organized by the years it covers. So it'll cover like 1900, 1910, 1920. But if you were trying to find out information about a certain historical person, it might not be really clear. Well, what chapter are they in? They were 80 years old. Which one is where I want to find the information I want? But if you look at the index under that person's name, it might show you that person's mentioned on pages 45 to 50, and also again on 53, 58, and 62. So now, rather than trying to read the entire textbook to look for that person, you just read those pages. It's a huge time saver if you understand how to use an index, okay? Here's an example. So here, and you can see, so here's a person, Asung Murray, 1116 to 39. Accuracy versus impression, 69, 72, 77, 110. Acrylic painting, analogous colors, antlers, Appaloosa colt. So there's all sorts of things. Now, sometimes you'll see this, see how there says backgrounds, and then there's kind of like a little indent. All these items that are indented are like little mini topics under the topic of backgrounds. Adding warmth to backgrounds, blending of backgrounds, creating depth in backgrounds, creating interest in backgrounds, creating light in backgrounds, receding of backgrounds, toning of backgrounds. And the reason is because sometimes people might, like I'm not gonna know that blending of backgrounds is covered. I'm just gonna be looking for backgrounds. So they're trying to make it really easy for people to use. The other thing is a lot of times things will be cross-referenced. So maybe it's listed under backgrounds, but maybe it would also be listed under light, right? That kind of idea. How is this similar to the table of contents, and how is it different? So there's still a list. It's still telling you what things are in the book, but they've organized the information differently. Oh, sorry, wrong spot. So the index is alphabetical. Okay, it doesn't care what order it appeared in the book. It just picks either the topic or the person's last name if it's a person, and then they tell you what page to find it on. Table of contents is normally organized numerically. Here's chapter 1. Here's all the things we talk about in order. And some won't list all these little tiny breakdowns. It might just say chapter 1, chapter 2, and here's like 50 pages. So sometimes the table of contents, this one is really helpful because it's really well broken down, but the table of contents might not always be broken down very well. So sometimes an index is more useful. It just kind of depends how the person who wrote it decided to organize that information. Hang on a sec. Okay, a glossary. A glossary is like a mini dictionary that lists and defines key new words and concepts used in the text. These are often located at the back of the book, but they may sometimes be located at the end of a chapter. And every now and again, sometimes you'll see they'll just do like a little tiny glossary sidebar on a page to explain a word right there. Generally, the younger a textbook is aimed for, like a grade 3 student, they're not going to put it at the end because they know a grade 3 student is probably not going to go all the way to the end of the book, look it up, and then come back, right? The older an audience a textbook is written to, the more likely they are to put it at the back because they know that adults are more capable of flipping back and forth and still hanging on to their place. It's really, really common in science, history, social studies textbooks where there's a lot of new words and concepts, and they want to make sure that you have the same idea as the author. Or there may be a concept that it's like, okay, everybody who teaches medicine needs to know that when we say this particular word, everybody means this. And there's like one definition that is the correct accepted definition, right? For some things, it's really important that everybody has the exact same idea as to what a word means. So here's an example. This one is one that I think was at the end of an entire book. It looks like, well, I'm not sure, it's got kind of stuff all over the place. Abiotic, the non-living part of an ecosystem such as a soil. Abrasion, the wearing away of cliffs by sediment thrown by breaking waves. Now, when we were looking at a dictionary included so much more than just the definition, right? It included the parts of speech. It included the syllables. It included the phonetic spelling. It included often synonyms or examples. This is much more simplified. It's just the basics, okay? Okay, headings and subheadings. Headings help to organize information into large sections related to that topic. Subheadings will help to arrange smaller amounts of text within each major heading. These can help to make it easier to understand the text as you are reading, as they serve as a kind of summary or label. When doing research, they can also help the reader save time by allowing you to skip over headings or subheadings that don't relate to their research topic and go right to the sections that are important to them. I'm mentioning this because when I've worked with students sometimes, I am surprised by how many people will completely skip over the subheading that is basically telling you, hey, here's the main idea of this section. And sometimes you don't even need to read that section. If you're looking at specific questions and the subheading is making it clear that that's not going to be covered in this section, you don't necessarily need to read the whole thing. That sounds kind of shocking to sometimes some people. They think, oh, the teacher intended us to read every single bit of this, but that's not always the case, right? It depends on what your purpose for reading is. So always pay attention to the headings and the subheadings because it really can sort of orient you, right? It's kind of like little landmarks on a map and tell you, hey, this is what's important about this section. So here is a textbook, looks like a history textbook. This is chapter 27, World War II and its aftermath. Okay, that's the heading. The entire chapter is going to be about that. Even on this page, there's a few subheadings. Goals for learning, map skills. This is a different textbook. We've got the Eastern Front and the Mediterranean. So if they're giving a lot of information at once, like a chapter could be 50 pages, they want to chunk it down into smaller amounts so it's easier to read and understand. Like nobody reads 50 pages and memorizes all of it. But you could read 3 pages on one subheading, summarize it, understand it, and then move on to the next section. So it's a way of chunking things into smaller topics that is just more manageable to understand. Okay, I can see my time is running out. We will finish working on lesson 6 tomorrow. If you have any questions, shoot me an email. I'll be happy to hear from you. I'm pleased to say I'm already getting lots of people handing stuff in. We've already got a few people graduating. So I'm looking forward to seeing your assignments. Hope you have a good evening, and I will talk to you guys tomorrow.